I work for the Department of Natural Resources and Energy Development, which I'm going to call DNR because it's a super long name. So I work for a very small section in DNR, the biodiversity section. And my specific group that are working on the Nature Legacy project, there are 5 of us. So we're quite small, but we're mighty. We started with 2 back in 2018 when this kind of all started, and now we're up to 5. And I'm very proud to say that we are all women, which is awesome. So starting off with our first slide here, New Brunswick's Nature Legacy. For those of you who may be familiar with the project, it used to be called the Pathway to Target 1, which it still is, but we rebranded it, calling it the Nature Legacy now. And our kind of slogan is protecting and conserving our natural places. Let's see if I can figure out how to use this. There we go. Okay, so like I mentioned, the Pathway to Canada Target 1 initiative is what it's technically called. Now this is a nationwide initiative, so it's not just New Brunswick. Every province and territory across Canada are all doing it. But just for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to focus on New Brunswick. So just kind of a quote from our overall nationwide project. By 2020, at least 17% of the terrestrial area and inland waters and 10% of the coastal and marine areas are conserved through networks of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures, or OECMs. So what is a protected area? A protected area is a clearly defined geographical space, recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means. So some of you might be familiar with PNAs, or protected natural areas. That's kind of what we're talking about here. So protected areas have been proven to be very effective and important, not only in Canada, but across globally. They help not only with just preserving habitat for species at risk, but also helping with flood management or the production of oxygen by preserving areas with lots of trees. We're helping with air and water quality. So it's more than just setting a square on the map and conserving it. It has a lot more effect past that. So achieving this 10% protection, so I didn't mention it in the last slide, but New Brunswick is just focusing on 10% instead of that 17. Just where we are a little bit smaller than some of the provinces and territories in Canada, we're going to start a little bit smaller and then hopefully we'll work our way up from there. But to achieve this 10%, we are GMB, DNR is leading this collaborative initiative, and we're working with Indigenous partners, we're working with conservation partners like the Nature Conservancy, CPAWS, Nature NB, places like that, as well as stakeholders, members of the public, and other provincial departments. So not just DNR, but we would work with other departments throughout GMB. And this 10% that we're aiming towards will double our currently protected land. So I think we're at about 4.6%, so it'll actually over the more than double it. And this 10% in terms of something that you can actually quantify is about 388,000 hectares. So that's how much newly protected area we would like to add by the end of 2023. So we don't have too much time left. So our focus for the 10% increase, we had 3 kind of main goals of this project. And through these 3 main goals, that's how we narrowed down our search and how we chose the areas that we did. So number 1 was to protect wildlife habitats and unique ecosystems. So old forest, rare species at risk, rare habitats, areas like that. Number 2 is to increase climate resiliency. So for freshwater and watersheds, we had a focus on that, as well as trying to maintain or make larger corridors for migration, whether it's mammals or birds or fish, trying to kind of across the board. And number 3 is to connect people with nature, which I think all of us in this room can probably relate to that. So we tried to focus on areas that are important to people as well, and culturally important, and connect us back with wildlife. So another portion of this project, while we mainly focused on crown lands, a very small portion of it was private lands. So that's where we relied very heavily on our conservation partners. So CPAWS, the Canadian, I can never remember what they stand for. Sorry, guys. CPAWS, NCC, NTNB, all those acronyms, all of the Ducks Unlimited, all those guys. So we relied heavily on them to procure these lands, and either they will be managed by them or they will be handed over to the Crown Land and we will manage them. So altogether, there's about 6 of these organizations and roughly 18 private land sites, ranging from very small to quite large. As you can see, Fry Island was one of our, half of it was already protected, but half of it has been added on in this project. So I'll give you kind of an overview of what the process was like. We had 3 main phases, so I'll kind of break them down for you. The first phase was to develop our areas. So we call them candidate conserved areas because as of right now, they are still all candidates. For the purpose of this presentation, I will call them CCAs, which is what we generally refer them to. We love our acronyms. So our first phase was conservation planning and nominated sites. So this happened from the fall of 2019 until last spring in 2021. And so there were a couple different steps within this phase. So step 1 was site identification. So identifying where are we going to protect and how do we find those areas. So we used a bunch of different mechanisms within this step. So gaps in the landscape. One of our colleagues actually did a gap analysis focusing on where there are areas that we are lacking in protection, and then cross-referencing it with areas that had high biological value. Expanding on already protected areas, so the PNAs that I mentioned before, or even national parks or privately owned land, we tried to focus on expanding those and making those larger. Conservation opportunities. So maybe there was a historical site or something that's important, as well as the land around it was also biologically important. We would try to focus on those kind of areas. Public nominations. We had a couple-month period where we had a survey on our website where the public could actually send us in a survey and suggest areas that they thought were important to them, important to their community, and have us focus on those areas as well. Conservation experts. So the private NGOs that I had mentioned before, such as CPAWS and TNB, ACCDC, the Atlantic Canadian Conservation Data Center, as well as connectivity. So this one kind of goes hand in hand with expanding on protected areas. So if we had 2 protected areas within a relatively close distance, we tried to connect them with some sort of corridor. So then step 2, which is the bulk of our work, is site delineation and review. So actually taking these areas that we all found to be important and figuring out, okay, how do I draw this on a map? So a lot of our work was based through GIS and online mapping using LiDAR and imagery and different layers that we had within the department. And a lot of this work was based on balancing and compromising. So we would kind of start off. So I'll draw your attention to this green blob on the screen. That is one of our CCAs. I believe it's Lake Anthony. So that's not how it started out. You can see it's kind of a weird shape. So we would start with kind of picking an area. Okay, this was identified in our gap analysis, or this was nominated by a member of the public. And we would draw kind of a circle or a square around the area. And then we would start looking at, okay, what conflicts are in the area? Because we know, obviously not everybody's going to be happy in the end with all of these. So we tried to do as much of a compromise as we could. So if there was already a forestry operation in process, we would try to avoid that. If there was an area that had a crown lease for something, we would try to avoid that, as well as minerals. And those are just to name a few. So there was a lot of juggling going on. And we tried to keep as much biological and conservation value as we could. So this area would have started out as a big square or circle, and it ended up being a shape because of all the conflicts in the area. And then after we made all these shapes, we kind of did them in batches. So throughout the past 2.5, 3 years, we would have each month, we would have a different batch of sites that we would first go through our small little 5-person group. And then we would consult with other departments and get their input on it. So from the forestry, from the minerals, from crown lands, from fisheries, all sorts of areas, just to keep everybody's interests in mind, because we know that there are a variety of interests on the land. So once those guys took a look at it, then we sent it to the public, and the public had an opportunity to comment on these areas through our website. I think that will be in the next part. Yeah, and through the public surveys, we also use that as an opportunity to gain more information. So whether they said, oh yeah, this is a good area or this isn't, they might have also said, there's a lot of moose in this area, or did you know that there's 3 waterfalls on this site? We all use that, that information to kind of build our sites and make them a little bit more robust. So phase 2, after we did all of that, so that was all kind of wrapped up last spring, 2021. Then we moved into phase 2, where we were gathering the information from those surveys that I mentioned, as well as from conservation experts and within our department as well. And then they became the candidate conserved areas, or CCAs. So this screenshot is actually from the public website. So when people want to go take a look at our map and see where these places are and possibly submit a survey or comments to us, this is what you're going to see. All the green, kind of bright green areas are our CCAs, and you would just click on one and it'll bring you to a survey and you can provide us information. As of right now, we have completed making all of our CCAs, so we are done. Fingers crossed. I've said that probably about 5 times within the past 6 months, and we kept adding more, but I'm 99.9% that this is our very last number. So right now, we are up to 414,000 hectares of candidate conserved areas. That doesn't mean that we're going to go through with all of it. If you recall from before, I said our 10% is 388,000 hectares. That's what we are committed to. So somehow we have to get this 414 down to 388. So we'll be going through a very similar process like we did to create them, to somehow weed out which ones are the best and which ones maybe we save for later. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting thrown in the trash. We might just put them in a box and save them for another initiative. So as of right now, we're at 107% of our target, which is fabulous. At the beginning, I didn't think that we'd get here, but we did. Through those surveys that I mentioned from the public, we had 770 participants, actually slightly more than that. So that gave us a lot of data to work with. And from these 770 participants, they commented on 742 individual CCAs, which is great. I think altogether we have maybe 1,200 CCAs, so it was a fairly good chunk of them. And the last batch of CCAs is actually open for comment right now. So if you guys want to go home after this and check out our website, you can actually put in comments yourself. So this is what our website looks like. This is kind of our landing page. For anybody who wants to check it out, our link is up there. Or you can just Google New Brunswick Nature Legacy, excuse me, and it should pop up, one of the first ones. Then we go on to our 3rd phase. So this kind of 2nd phase of candidate conserved areas and getting those on the map, we're just finishing those up now. So mid-January, we had those finalized. The last batch is out for comment right now. I believe that's ending mid-June, June 19th or something like that. After that, that portion is all done. So right now we're moving into phase 3, which is moving these candidates to actual protected areas. So how are we going to protect these areas? We have 2 main mechanisms that we usually work with. For this project, we are mainly going to use the conservation easement. So we're probably all familiar with the protected natural areas. we're not actually going to use that one. We might use it for a few of them further down the road, but as for right now, we're just going to put them under conservation easement. So what's the difference? A P&A is a lot more stringent. It's a lot higher restrictions, I guess. Not to say that the conservation easement doesn't have those restrictions. It just makes it a little bit easier to work with. Where the P&A, not only are you protecting the surface of the land, you're also protecting down to the core of the earth. So the conservation easement doesn't protect down to the core of the earth. So we can work with mining companies and oil and natural gas companies, and they will be more willing to agree to this project and be more supportive of it if they realize, oh, you're just protecting the surface. We can still go underneath from outside of the protected area, and that's okay. So we get a little bit more support from outside of the government that way. So kind of just a little bit more about the conservation easement, because that will be our main mechanism. Not to say that that's our only mechanism, there will be some other ones, but it does not restrict the practice of Aboriginal or treaty rights. It's binding on the Crown, which means that it restricts what government can allow on these areas. So there won't be new harvesting of trees. There won't be any new mining. There won't be any new buildings being added to these areas. But saying that, while restricting the government itself, it still allows everybody else to hunt, to fish, to trap, and to do other traditional uses on these lands. So basically just like normal Crown land. And this results in permanent and effective protection of the land. So just like the P&A, it's just as strong. This makes it, when I was saying it was a little bit more flexible, it's replaceable by an alternative conservation tool. So what I mean by that is it can either be replaced by an equally strong or higher. So it could become a P&A, or it could become something that is equally as strong as a conservation easement. So what comes next? So this is the part that we're in right now, is actually working on permanently protecting these areas. So we have a first we call them batches. We have a first batch of 100,000 hectares that will be protected in the spring of 2022. So hopefully very, very soon. And then the rest of the 288,000 will be split into two or three more batches, one in the fall and then one again in the winter of 2023. And it'll all wrap up by March 2023. And so there's just kind of a slide on what you can do in protected areas, and it kind of goes from what you are able to do, what may be possible with a little bit of permission from the government or what have you, and then what's not allowed. So just some examples: you are allowed to hike, to bike, to hunt, to fish, to trap, those kind of things. If there's an ATV trail already established, you can use those. What may be possible, scientific research. So if there's certain animals or plants or fish or what have you in the area, it may be possible for groups to go in and study on these areas. Okay, this is my last slide. And then our last one is what's not allowed. So like I mentioned before, we're not allowed to do any new forestry operations, or we're not allowed to do mining operations or building infrastructure.